Divine Rising New Earth, welcome or welcome back to the show where we broadcast the frequency of the new earth now. I'm Anneka and I'm here with my lovely co-host Calista.
Hi everyone.
And we're super excited to be back for another episode.
Yes, we are continuing the spirit of our previous episode. Whether you saw it or not, it was hot topics in spirituality, and we wanted to dive into another hot topic in spirituality: toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing. For those of you who might not be familiar with those concepts, I think that there's a very well-known concept in spirituality called the law of attraction, which is basically like attracts like, and you harmonize with other frequencies that are resonating at the same frequency as you are. So when you raise your own frequency and vibration, you are vibrating up at that higher wavelength and you attract higher vibrational and so forth. There's a big emphasis on focusing on the positive and gratitude instead of always complaining and being in the victim mindset and focusing so much on negativity. Toxic positivity is basically the idea that concept can sometimes be used in ways where the context doesn't really call for it and it's actually not helpful, and can kind of be a form of spiritual bypassing, which is, I think, kind of tied hand in hand with this same concept. And spiritual bypassing is when people might use a spiritual concept. Toxic positivity and the law of attraction is an example of this, where they're basically resistant to addressing the reality. And so they employ a spiritual concept as a form of denial to bypass the discomfort of facing that reality head on. For example, someone might say that they just want to meditate all day and get in a high abundant frequency to attract a lot of money to pay off their debts and get a house and a car and so on and so forth, and make these changes that they want to see in their reality. But if they're not taking any aligned action, then actually that concept of meditating and getting aligned with an abundant frequency, which is great and amazing, is actually just being used as an excuse to not take the action that you're avoiding. So that's a little 101 on at least my perception of these concepts, and I'd love to know if Anneka's are similar or just what you think in general.
I'm super curious actually what the original question was that we got that was about spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity. I think that would be interesting to pull up. Like everything, I feel like there's such nuance to it, and just like how I think people, they've distinguished between there being, good forms of positivity and maybe some forms of using positivity that aren't as helpful in all moments. I think for me, I also have noticed a misuse of even the term spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity in a way that I think isn't helpful. And I think that the way that you just explained it, I completely agree with. Because I think if it is the sense that you're completely ignoring things that you have to do in the physical world, like that just isn't gonna fly. I think in this day and age, unless you want to be just a monk meditating on a mountain, but even then, most people have to tend to certain things, even if it's just like making a fire. I mean, the most advanced yogis can probably control their body temperature and not have to eat, not have to drink. But if we're talking about more in the realm of somebody who'd be tuning into this podcast, action is required in the physical realm. And I think that we talked about in a recent episode there being almost three prongs, which is your feeling, your vibration, your thoughts, and then the action that you're taking. And so I think that action and making things happen in the 3D realm, or just, in the more dense reality, I think that's totally spiritual. I mean, we had a whole episode about it on our original podcast, Brainwash Yourself, called Chop Wood, Carry Water. So I almost think that the idea that bypassing the physical to go to the vibrational isn't even spiritual. So to me, it's like almost like not even spiritually bypassing. It's just ignoring an aspect of the integrated whole of existence. And I almost think spirituality is like integration, it's wholeness, it's oneness, and it's an acceptance and working with all things and all parts of life while, holding this sense of awareness and intention and connection to a greater unity between all things and all energies. And so that's why I think sometimes the way it's discussed kind of overlooks that a little bit. Like, it makes it feel like the vibrational is only the spiritual. And I think it also depends on what your aim is. Because, for example, if you're like a hardcore yogi whose number one goal is kind of evolving your consciousness and coming to this state of awakening, it does serve you more to like be more in the transparent realms. And then there are people who want to create more earthly success and legacy. So it's going to serve you more to act differently than somebody who has kind of different goals and different soul callings in this lifetime. And, one doesn't even have to necessarily be more spiritual than the other. But then again, spiritual bypassing can be, I think people use it in different ways as well, not just like not taking action in the physical realm, but people also talk about it a lot in terms of ignoring negative emotions and like just tuning in, basically like not addressing things that feel sticky, not enjoyable, like old patterns and all these things. And I feel like this is like such a nuanced conversation, because there is a reality that if there's something that needs to like be moved through you and you like repress it and you repress it and you repress it, it could end up backfiring or expanding. But on the flip side, I think that your ability to shift your states, shift your frequency, and shift your thoughts will eventually lead to a different feeling state, to where like those patterns and those things, even like traumas, memories, like almost don't exist anymore. They're like dissolved like once you reach this other state. But like that also requires having the tools to get you from one state to the other. I think sometimes in the spiritual community, people who are like really big on the spiritual bypassing conversation, I think it can become unhelpful in times where it's not showing people the power they have to actually shift their state based upon their vibration, their thoughts, and their actions, and how you don't have to untangle and dissect every little thing that's ever happened in your life to get from point A to point B. There are actually ways to like move without even having to like unpack that old backpack, and like you can still like move the energy, change your state, and that is a possibility. So it's like such an individual journey, I think, for every person. So that's why I almost feel like the greatest thing that you can do is get to know yourself and what you need, and then like stay in your own lane and like not really judge or project on other people and their experience that they're having.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. You're basically seeing people use the term spiritual bypassing as a way to deny the truth of certain spiritual teachings when it doesn't even really apply in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's like, honestly, I think where I've seen people use it the most, which might just be like where I've come across it personally, is almost like a judgment of like, you need to like look at that, you need to deal with that in almost the context of like other people, which I'm sure then they're doing it to themselves too, but like almost like, oh, you're not willing to look at your shadow, or yeah, like almost like you have to go back and unpack that thing when you were 12 so that you can like move forward instead of like ignoring it. But like that might be because like that's what that person needs to do, and that's what would be helpful for like that person, but you don't necessarily know that that's most helpful for the other person. But it sounds like what you've come across is a little bit different.
Well, I think a really big part of it is resistance and denial, and I think that on this podcast we definitely endorse an energy first perspective, where our previous podcast too, Brainwash Yourself, we talk so much about the mechanics of why and how it works, that we are generating our reality, our external reality that we experience from our conscious and subconscious internal reality. So in that way, I think ignoring the 3D and focusing on a desired outcome instead of the less preferable aspects of your external circumstance is pretty much the key to getting what you want in life. That said, I think there's a big difference between ignoring the 3D reality and ignoring and denying what's going on in your internal reality. And I think that resistance is a key factor in this experience, where there are some, whether they're emotions or thought patterns that are uncomfortable or are viewed a certain way in our culture or our family, we view those as bad, wrong, and a lot of people put the label negative on that, which I think is one thing that makes these conversations quite confusing at times, because there's a difference between a negative polarity and a positive polarity, and something that you don't like and something that you like. And they have certain overlaps, but I think that is one thing that factors a lot into all the concepts that we're discussing in these conversations. There are certain experiences that are neutral, but we don't like them and resist them subconsciously a lot. And these can be aspects of our internal experience that, whether we ignore them or like it or not, are actually happening. It's just a matter of whether we're willing to bring them into our awareness and be neutral about them and let go of all those stories and triggers, however it is that we want to work through that, or whether it's going to stay repressed for however long, if not until future lifetimes, to be worked out. So I think that another key element besides this whole distance, denial of internal reality aspect is when it comes to relating. And toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing, I see sometimes being used as a way to just mask someone's discomfort with someone else's experience, or at worst, kind of like a gaslighting manipulation tactic. So I think those are like two very different situations. When it comes to a gaslighting manipulation tactic, it's just important to know your truth. Just depending on the certain dynamics of the conversation, I would set boundaries in place with that person. But when it comes to the toxic positivity and the spiritual bypassing kind of being employed in a situation where someone is uncomfortable, or maybe they're what you perceive as complaining or in victim consciousness, and whether or not you're conscious of it, it's triggering you and it's bothering you, and you don't feel comfortable sitting with that. Maybe it's because you're really trying to work through those aspects of yourself, and you don't really want to engage with that energy of negativity that you are perceiving, but you don't fully have the tools to like artfully and respectfully communicate that to the person you're talking to, or whether it's just something that is even more in your shadow, that you are just really uncomfortable with sitting with pain and unconsciousness in other people because you're not comfortable with those aspects of yourself. I think that is also when sometimes people can just, instead of sitting with that discomfort in them, they try to, as quickly as possible, alleviate and neutralize that discomfort in the other person by telling them like, oh, it's so easy, you know, just don't focus on it. Just focus on the positive. Just do this. Just because that's what they want that person to do for their comfort. So I think that is something as well that is just something that I personally think I have even done to people in the past, and try to work on being aware of that tendency, and when I might feel some discomfort just sitting with someone in their process, or I might have a part of me that's triggered by something that someone is sharing, and be aware that that's not always the most supportive tool to offer someone, even in that aim of getting them to adopt more positive viewpoints from your perspective. And that could also be a situation where it's just about you setting boundaries as well. It's just good to be aware of like these dynamics that might be playing out in relationships, like below the level of people's conscious awareness, that is something I just love to nerd out on, like these subtle dynamics that play in like relational situations.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. I mean, there is an energetic component to it. I think there's a very big difference from like having a close relationship with someone and someone needs to be honest about what they're going through so that like it can move, and like maybe they can get a reflection, maybe they can just like have shared camaraderie around the experience, you know, no matter what the experience is, like not labeling it, you know, good, bad, whatever. I think it is a really great practice to be able to be there for people and not need to project onto them what you think they should do unless they ask and that's what they're looking for, which some people are, and some people are asking and looking to be directed into a higher space. Especially if you're somebody who does that and is known to do that, people will come to you because that's what they're looking for. I have people that I go to that I'm like, okay, I went to that person because I needed that elevation. And that's one thing that I like really appreciate in people, to be honest. I think that that is really valuable. And there is an energetic component though of like the energy of complaining rather than just like sharing, but like complaining, because that can be, I think, a very common unconscious habit that a lot of people, including myself, can be in the habit of. And it actually is not a beneficial energy to the system. Like, this is something that I agree with, that I've like read from yogic teachings and different like also just like energetic spiritual teachings, that like if you could actually see the energy, it's like it actually makes you feel a certain way because that is like the signature of the energy, and it's not healthy. It's just like how when you look up the Dr. Emoto, all the water experiments, and you speak like loving words onto water, you freeze it, the crystals will be like so beautiful and so harmonious and crystalline divine. And then when you speak words of hate or complaining over them, they'll look like distorted and funky. And I think that's sometimes how you feel. So I don't think you have to deny that experience if that is how you are consistently feeling around someone. There's a difference between like not being able to hold space for someone having an intense experience and allowing yourself to be around and consenting to a kind of complaining frequency all the time. And for someone, I think I'll just speak on my personal journey, have always, or have often, you know, found it pretty easy to like listen to people, and people like often share with me and feel comfortable talking around me. And like there have been specific relationships in my life where I feel like it would just be like a call, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this, just like venting and complaining for so long. And for me, and this is something unique to me, but some of you might relate, that like I don't even necessarily like speak my boundaries, like this is my boundary, blah 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 blah, but like if I'm feeling like something isn't healthy for me, I'll just stop participating in it as much. And like that, I feel like often is very communicative, because I have had friends where like that has been something I've had to do, and then they'll just on their own reach a point where like they'll tell me they're going to call me to like, because they need to talk about this situation, and then I'll get a text 2 days later that's like, actually I don't even want to bring that energy into your field, like it's not even like worth a thing. And then I'll see them like blast out of it and like not even be in a space where they like need to discuss it or talk about it anymore. And then we're like talking about all these like more creative things that are happening in their life, more than like mulling over these situations that are a waste of their time and their energy, essentially. So I think that there is some nuance that comes in with the toxic positivity. I think there's actually an interesting teaching also from the Kundalini Yoga teachings, and it's about how we have a negative mind. We have negative mind, positive mind, neutral mind. And so the aim is you always want to be able to perceive both things. And this isn't even negative and positive in the way that most people might think, but like negative will be like, what's missing? What could possibly happen? It's kind of the part of you that's assessing the things you would need to know for like safety, or like a ball getting dropped, you know, it could be a variety of things like that. And then the positive is like, oh, all of the good things, all of the ways that this could go right, all of these things. Like you want to be able to see both, and then from like a neutral space, you can choose which way you want to act. And like you actually kind of do want to make a habit to go the positive route, but you don't want to deny the negative polarity of it. Like you want to be aware, because you don't want to be blind to it. That can lead to you making mistakes, missing things. It's dicey down here in this human realm. There are like a lot of things that we want to hold a perception of, and then from there be like, I'm aware, I'm choosing this. And then at least, you know, you're navigating with some consciousness in the situation. And so that's like something that you can, if it resonates with you, take on sovereignly within yourself. Like, for example, if I was going through a hard time, and there might be things that I need to change in my life because I'm like, okay, there are these things I have power over that I could shift and change that would get me into a better space. You know what I mean? So I could see like, these are all the places that I could improve, that like I might actually be lacking or ignoring. These are all the things that I'm doing amazing. And then like from this neutral space, I could be like, okay, I'm going to choose to focus on like gratitude and like positivity and a positive self-concept. But I'm also going to like address these things that are over here that I viewed and that I decided needed to be addressed. But I can address them like in a positive way, like in an empowered way, because if I feel disempowered around these things, that's not going to help me move forward. So I think a lot of, like Calista was saying, you know, our show is like a very much energy first perspective. And so I think seeing all things, but then having the most empowered perspective and energy around it all so that you can like keep moving forward in, you know, a creative, intentional way is where the magic lies.
I love it. Okay. Should we do, to wrap it up, like just a quick speed answers of the questions that originally were asked about them? There's two. One about toxic positivity. The first one is, can toxic positivity truly coexist with spiritual principles? So I'm thinking this means like the concept of toxic positivity. Can that be real while things like the law of attraction are also real? And I think that yes, I think that I do believe in the law of attraction, and I truly don't think that the way to shift into a more high vibrational frequency is always to focus on the positive. I think that can sometimes lead to enabling this denial and ignoring this resistance and trying to force this image of non-reality. But that said, I totally think that is somewhat of a niche case, and it's good to be aware of, especially as things like the law of attraction and spirituality are becoming more and more trending and people are focusing more on the positive, which is a good thing. It's just good to be aware that people can use that as kind of just like a line and a manipulation tactic and an excuse, honestly, and just not to fall into that trap.
Yes, I mean, I think everything can exist. And that, like Calista was saying, the most important thing is to know your own truth, because then it honestly doesn't even matter what anyone else is trying to do to you. You can feel when that doesn't resonate with you and it just like deflects. And so I think knowing how you want to feel, how you want to act, how you want to move forward and create in your life, and like what really helps you. And then also just like being present with everything that moves through, because we do go through cycles and nothing ever stays the same. So I think it's knowing the difference between resisting something and then indulging yourself. And those are like two ends of the spectrum. And so just like keeping in mind if you're bumping up against either of those, and then just like try to stay in that centered space.
I love it. Okay, next one. Are spiritual bypassing and positive affirmations misunderstood, or are they inherently harmful?
I think they're misunderstood. I mean, I'll just speak across like the denial I've heard that I've personally come across, because I'm sure it can be different for everybody. But a lot of times with the positive affirmations, I'm really big on, and I think a lot of what we've talked about on our last podcast and this podcast is like very big on, we're kind of a computer. You can reprogram new things. You can program your software on the computer to completely shift and change the hologram of your reality that you're experiencing. And I think sometimes people think that the affirmations are denying a current experience. And if you don't believe them, then there's no point, that it's like dishonest. But the whole point is like, it's not about whether you believe them. It's not even about like how you feel when you first start saying them. Like, it is an objective, repetitive programming of your computer, and it takes a bit. Like, you have to have patience. It doesn't just happen in one day. I mean, you could use affirmations for one day and the frequency could really like make a fast shift, but like ultimately the reprogramming of the subconscious mind takes repetition. And that's that. I mean, if you do it, you understand and you see the difference, because it's not like somebody is special who has it work. It's kind of like a formula. So I do think they can be stood, and I do think they're very powerful and a major matrix hack.
Totally. Okay, I think this is phrased really interesting. It's, I think, maybe using spiritual bypassing in a different way than I was, where maybe spiritual bypassing in this context is like a technique that you use to bypass your 3D circumstance in the spiritual energetic realm. So little different understanding than I originally had, but when it comes to using that as a tool and a technique, and affirmations as a example of that, I think this question is also so interesting, like presuming that the mainstream understanding of these is as inherently harmful, because I've never heard that, but I love them. I use them all the time. I do not think that they're inherently harmful at all, but I think that there is a lot of nuance to using them in the most effective way and how helpful that they can be. Like Anneka's talking about robotic affirming, especially subliminal robotic affirmations that your conscious mind doesn't even have the chance to hear and negate. That's just repeating and saturating your subconscious with a new belief. I think that is a great way to spiritually bypass, in the way that this question is phrasing it, by, like Anneka was saying, reprogramming your software. I also am a believer in using affirmations consciously to shift my vibration just instantly in the moment, because like Anneka was saying, the repetitions thing takes quite a while at times. It can take months to fully install. But yeah, I think the difference between an affirmation that's helpful and an affirmation that's not is whether it makes you feel empowered and makes you feel a little bit better, or whether it makes you feel like you're lying to yourself, or spins your mind into all of these loops of like, how would that ever happen? How would that ever be the case? And just as a pro tip, I'm a big believer in baby step affirmations, because I have like a lot of deep emotions that can be challenging to process at times. And so I do really practice working with myself where I'm at and see a lot of value in that. So if I'm feeling very upset and affirming I feel great, I feel great, I feel great is just not hitting at all, then I will affirm something like, I'm open to feeling better. Like, I'm open to feeling better right now, or it's okay that I'm having the emotional experience that I'm having. I accept this emotional experience that I'm having, so that it's like a little baby step on the path to feeling great, where it's more comfortable for my conscious mind and my body to accept shifting from feeling upset to being open to feeling better, or shifting from feeling upset to accepting and feeling neutral about the fact that I feel upset. And then from there, maybe I can get to affirming feeling great. So just a little tip, if you are someone who really does resonate with the more negative connotation of spiritual bypassing and is like, how is this working? Like, this is making me feel horrible. Maybe just dive in a little bit to the nuance and just meeting yourself where you're at and seeing what thought or belief you could have that would really ease that discomfort and that struggle, and then try that as your affirmation. It doesn't have to be the cookie cutter ones, but I do think intentionally choosing your words to direct your thoughts, to form your beliefs, to support your desires is one of the best things you could ever learn to do.
Amazing. I love it. I think the final note, people think about spiritual bypassing in different ways, but I do think it's so funny. I remember like when I first heard the term, and I still like kind of think this, but it depends, like some ways I think it's, when it's used, it's valid. I'm like, I feel like the whole point of going on the spiritual journey is to like start to be able to bypass things. It's like you're going faster, you're evolving faster, you have tools to be able to bypass and dissolve things that like you might not have been able to do previously. And so I think there can be like a positive spin on it. And that's kind of like how I think of it. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm bypassing things. Like that lesson could have taken me 2 decades to learn, but instead like it happened in 3 months of like reprogramming a new belief into my mind, or like releasing in energy from like lifetimes past, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I feel like we really covered a wide range of viewpoints on it. So let us know what you think. We love to hear from you. You can find us at Divine Rising New Earth on Instagram, TikTok, and email us at divinerisingnewearth@gmail.com.
Flourish, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next time.